And this was from a State of the Nation speech yesterday. Chris Hipkins, Labor leader, talking about, well, what they did and didn't do well last time.
I want to know that I can deliver on any promises that I make. That's the standard that I'll be holding myself to and our next Labor government to. Because frankly, Kiwis have had enough of promises that aren't kept. And I don't want to repeat that cycle.
So joining us now to not repeat that cycle is Chris Hipkins. Good morning.
Good morning, Ryan.
Was the list of your failures longer than the list of your successes, do you reckon?
I've been really clear that we've got to focus in on a core group of things. I've said jobs, health, homes and the cost of living are going to be my top priorities if we should form the government after this year's election. And that means that the commitments I make in those areas are going to be things that I know I can deliver on, because whether it's our previous government or the current government or the government before that, people are looking at politicians and going, we don't necessarily trust any of the promises you make because we've heard it all before. And we have to break out of that. We've actually got to be realistic in what we promise, and we've got to know that we can deliver on it.
The Genesis equity raise, yesterday you said they've announced record profits and they should be looking to their own pockets before asking for money from the government. Do you know how much of their program they are funding themselves?
I haven't seen the breakdown of that, no. But
so why would you say? But hang on, why would you say that? You're pointing the finger at them. Why would you say that without first finding out how much money from their own pockets, in your words, they are or aren't using?
Since the mixed ownership model was introduced, so that's when the government sold off half of the generators, they have extracted billions and billions of dollars out of New Zealand consumers by overcharging them for their electricity, and they haven't invested in new electricity generation. Now they're coming back to the government and saying, we need you to give us more money so that we can raise capital to do something that they should have been doing for the last decade and a half that they haven't been doing because they've focused on making uber profits instead. That is something that the government is doing nothing about.
What if I was to tell you that they have, of the $400 million that we're putting in, to get equity, by the way, into Genesis, they are investing $1.6 billion for the new generation?
It's good that we're seeing new investment in renewable electricity generation in New Zealand. That's exactly what we want to see. But it should have been happening long before now.
You've also said they've made record profits this year. Do you know why?
Well, because of high power prices.
Rained a lot last year, that's how they make their money, but the year before was the opposite, so the opposite occurred. I mean, are you making cheap politics out of this?
No, absolutely not. We have a situation of manufactured scarcity when it comes to electricity in New Zealand, and that isn't acceptable. We have an abundant supply of renewable energy options. We should be developing those so that New Zealanders don't end up having to pay for mega profits for the electricity companies,
yeah, but they're not,
while they keep electricity scarce.
But Chris, they're not. There might be abundant, but only at certain times. That's the problem.
Well, no, that's not true. Actually, we've got a whole lot of...
It doesn't rain every day. It's not sunny every day.
But you don't need all of those things to happen at the same time. Generally speaking, if the sun isn't shining, there's often rain. If it's not raining, then there's more likely to be sun. Wind is intermittent, sure, that we can use our hydro lakes more effectively.
So are you saying that the energy crunch...
range of options.
Hang on. Are you saying the energy crunch that we experienced last year was manufactured?
The energy crunch is because they haven't invested enough in more generation. If they'd invested more and more generation, we wouldn't have had an energy crunch.
So thank God for the LNG?
No, absolutely not. That is a massive step backwards for New Zealand. It ultimately ties us to very volatile and potentially very expensive imported gas from overseas, when we should be developing renewable energy in New Zealand that is so much cheaper.
Do you know how much a new crossing over the Waitemata will cost?
I haven't seen the price of that yet because they haven't yet figured out where it's going to go, what the option is, whether it be a tunnel or a bridge, when it's going to be built or how much it's going to cost or what the specifications of it will be.
Roughly,
all of those things are pretty important.
They are, but nonetheless you've made policy announcements about this, so I want to see what detail you have garnered. I've seen estimates of up to $20 billion. You've seen those?
It will undoubtedly be in the billions. I do have a lot of sympathy for what Wayne Brown has said, though, that we need to make sure that what we're doing here is affordable. And that means looking at all of the options and saying, what is the option that's going to deliver the best value for money for Aucklanders? And it doesn't necessarily need to be the most gold-plated option.
Fair enough. But how do you know you're going to make enough money to pay for a new bridge by not tolling the old one?
Well, you have to figure out what you're going to build, where you're going to build it, when you're going to build it, and who's going to build it.
But you just admitted you know none of that.
Before you figure out how you're going to pay for it.
But you've just admitted you know none of that, yet yesterday you said you wouldn't toll the old bridge. So how do those two things stack up together?
Because ultimately, decisions we make about which new roads to build, and not just the Auckland Harbour Bridge, but which new roads we build around the country, have to be stacked up with good economic analysis of the benefits of those. And if they become so expensive that no one wants to use them, well, that probably answers the question as to whether or not there's the right economic benefit from building them. So I think this idea that we just go out there and promise a whole lot of new infrastructure, like the current government have with their roads of national significance, with no idea whether actually it's a good investment or not, and no idea how they're going to pay for it, is a cycle that we've got to stop.
The Infracom report made very clear that the reason you need to toll the old bridge to pay for the new one is that people will just use the free one and no one will use the expensive one, and you'll never get anything built. And that's exactly what you announced yesterday.
Well, certainly if you're tolling it at $9, that would be the case. And but at this point, we don't know how much the bridge is going to cost. So at this point, we've got to figure out how much it's going to cost.
No, but you've already halved your revenue opportunities.
What you're going to build.
You've already halved your revenue opportunities, haven't you? Because you've ruled out tolling the old bridge. So who's going to use the new one when you can go for free on the old one?
But we're talking about something that at this point we don't know what we're talking about.
Well, you started it. Yeah, but you started talking about this, not me. So why don't you finish it? Why would you use an expensive new one when you can use a free old one?
Not tolling the Auckland Harbour Bridge, the existing Auckland Harbour Bridge, which has already been bought and paid for, is a principled decision by us. In terms of how
much does it cost?
Harbour crossing, that is something that we will figure out. Well, how much does it cost? We don't know.
Okay, all right. So
we'll pay for it once we know what we're building.
Have you figured out what your pay equity claim is going to cost yet? 13 billion or thereabouts?
Oh, we'll set all of that out in due course as well.
See, the problem we've got here is you've got to
cut women's.
Now you've got what?
Right? No, we don't.
$10-12 billion for a bridge because you've ruled out half your revenue. I mean, who knows? You got $10-13 billion for a pay equity. The billions are adding up for you and for Labor, and how are we going to pay for them?
The bridge that we're talking about, Ryan, is probably still at least 10 years away. It's a long way into the future. There's plenty of time to figure out what we're going to build and how we're going to build it and how we're going to pay for it. In terms of pay equity, we are committed to ensuring that women get paid fairly. I'm not willing to stand here and say that women should accept less pay than men for doing the same work simply because...
I'm asking how much it's costing.
To figure out how to pay for that.
Yeah. How are you going to pay for it?
We're working through that
You're working through it at the moment.
Okay,
Okay, so promise first, do the numbers later. What about the 30% GDP debt ceiling that Grant Robertson suggested was a good idea? Do you agree with him still?
When we set out our fiscal plan before the election, and it'll be after this year's government budget, we will set out where we sit on all of those issues, including those measures around debt to GDP ratios and so on. But I will say this on debt. At the moment, we're borrowing for the wrong things. Borrowing for long-lived assets, like infrastructure, can be a good investment for New Zealand. Borrowing, because we're not balancing the government's budget and paying the day-to-day bills properly, that is a problem. So we do need to rebalance around government borrowing what we borrow for.
Chris, given your in-principle decisions this morning, on principle, do you think it would be a principled decision to increase health and education spending at least in line with inflation?
Generally speaking, yes.
Okay. And finally, landlords, should they expect that they will have to help fund some of this? Will you take away the interest deductibility as the previous government did that you were part of?
I've been, listening to feedback from landlords about that, and removing 100% of interest deductibility was, I think, something that we're unlikely to do in that same way again, but we'll set that out again when we set out our fiscal plan.
So you would instead do it like a lesser percentage, maybe 80% or 50% or something like that?
Well, you can keep speculating on that, Ryan. The reason that we're not making announcements on any of those things until after the government's budget is what I started this interview saying. I want to know that when I set out our commitments for the next election, that we can actually deliver on them.
Do you think doing that policy led to rents going up or down?
It had barely been implemented, so too difficult to draw a clear line on that.
All right. Chris, appreciate your time this morning as always. That's Chris Hipkins, the Labor leader, with us live from Parliament.